Okay. So yes, this is the CSIC call for May 17th. Mike Henretty is going to introduce himself. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Can you see my screen? It says
Yes.
Finding Our Common Voice. Great. So welcome to my talk, Finding Our Common Voice, Democratizing AI Through Open Data. My name is Michael Henretty. I am an engineer and speech technologist and strategist, working at Mozilla, along with Kelly Davis, who is here today as well. And we're working on a project called Common Voice. So the goal of the talk today is to spread awareness for the project that we're working on, talk a little bit about why we're doing it, how we did it, and then more generally, we'd like to start a conversation around how voice technology and the web can play together nicely to give more people and more communities access to this, what we see as a very important technology.
It's interesting that the Zoom chat is actually appearing on your screen. It doesn't usually, so you may want to move it to the side, yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think
no
I shared my whole screen and not my window, so hopefully this is a little bit better.
It's great.
Great. Yeah, so the web and our voices have always played together really nicely. The web needs our voices, as well as our voices need the web. Our voices help us understand each other and build empathy and a shared understanding of how we can move forward together. And that was at the core of the internet, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But right now, the web needs our voices more than ever, both figuratively and literally. So figuratively, the web needs our voices because we have reached a turning point in the history of technology where people are starting to understand the ramifications of their private data being available in the cloud, and they're demanding better services and better protections around this personal data, which we at Mozilla think is a really good thing. But also, the web needs our voices very literally. And what I mean by that is how the rise of voice technology and voice assistance is becoming pervasive in our lives, but the voice, but voices and the internet don't play together so well right now. And so that's what I would like to talk about today. I'm hearing some feedback from somebody. Is there, maybe someone's not muted, or am I the only one hearing that?
I've muted them.
Okay, great. Cool. And so I'd like to talk about voice technology and the internet. And to do so, I'm going to take a step back and tell you a little story about how Mozilla got involved in this space. So a few years ago, Mozilla was working on a mobile phone operating system. It was called Firefox OS. It was actually what both Kelly Davis and I were hired to work on for Mozilla. And as part of this project, we were building a voice assistant that was very similar to Apple's Siri. However, we were having a lot of difficulty building a voice recognition engine that was at a level of quality that people expected from their voice assistants. And I'd like to talk about why. You see, computers learn to understand people very similar to how people learn to understand people. Computers need to listen to and process a lot of people talking before it can understand what the meaning is, what the words people are saying. And in the case of speech recognition, computers actually learn more slowly than humans do. So you need a lot of this data. We're talking tens of thousands of hours of labeled voice data. To give you a sense of scale that amount is, someone recently put together a data set based on all the TED Talks ever, which is in English. And all the TED Talks ever amounted to only a couple hundred of hours of spoken audio data. So we need 100 times all of TED Talks ever for just a single language to do a high quality speech recognition system. And that's tough because this data is really hard to find. First of all, when you can find it, it's usually a really small data set, or it's really expensive, or both. And then if you're looking for languages other than English and accents other than North American male, most likely this data doesn't exist at all anywhere. And meanwhile, while we were building Firefox OS, we had the goal of bringing the next billion people online. We wanted to put the internet in people's hands who had never had the internet before. And so what this meant was, first of all, building a really inexpensive phone. So think around $20 to $25 US dollars, but also localized content for emerging markets in places like India and Africa. However, a collection of voice data in these languages, which we were targeting, was just non-existent. So that's why Mozilla created the Common Voice project. Common Voice is Mozilla's initiative to crowdsource a large public data set of human speech in every language, every accent, every gender, to make speech technology more open, inclusive, and accessible for everyone. It's pretty simple how it works. We have a website that's up right now. It's voice.mozilla.org. You can go to it and record your voice. You can also listen to other people's recording and verify what they said. That's important for the overall quality of the data set. And then we make all of this data available on our download page under CC0 license, so pure public domain. We launched this project last November. We published the first version of the data set. This was about 500 hours of English from 20,000 different people. This made us the second largest public data set that we know about. However, this is just the beginning. As I said, our goal is to make language technology more accessible, and of course that means more accents, more languages. So our big effort right now is around going multi-language. Luckily for us, Mozilla has an amazing localization community, and we've been able to leverage those tools in that community to help us reach these new languages. So currently, we're launched in around 25 languages, big ones like German and French, but also small ones like Welsh and Chuvish, and we're adding new languages all the time. If this is something you're interested in, if you want to get involved in a new language or one of the existing languages, I'll have some contact info at the end because this is our big effort right now. However, Mozilla is no longer building Firefox OS, and this begs the question, why would you, as Mozilla, still collect this data if you're not building a phone with a voice assistant? That's a good question. So, first and foremost, Mozilla is building the world's most advanced open source speech recognition engine right now. It's called Deep Speech. It's on GitHub. So it's free to download, free to use. We even have models that we've been training ourselves that are free to download and free to use. Last November, we also passed a milestone where our speech recognition was surpassing human level recognition, so superhuman, not subhuman recognition levels for English. As I said, though, this is only the beginning. However, we're already starting to see nice changes in the market. So for instance, there is a product out there called Mycroft, which is an open source alternative to Amazon's Alexa, and they're using deep speech to power their speech recognition engine. But more generally, the reason why we're still collecting this data has to do with the voice ecosystem. At the forefront of this ecosystem is the rise of voice assistants and what's called smart speakers in the home. But if you peel back the curtains of this technology, you'll find that this industry is dominated and powered by just a handful of very large corporations. And the reason why it's only a handful of players in this space is that it's extremely hard to build really good speech recognition technology. And the reason that is there are many reasons for that. We already talked about the data piece, but that's just step one. You also need a team of machine learning scientists whom are very hard to find and very hard to hire. You also need access to vast computational resources and really specialized hardware. So for instance, Mozilla, we have a machine in our Berlin office that is on the order of price of a sports car, and we run that machine constantly for weeks at a time to build our recognition engine. So it requires access to this type of machines, which is really hard. And then on top of that, the voice world, the voice market is a patent minefield. I could give a whole talk on why it's so hard to innovate in this space because of these patents, but for now, let's just say that it's a huge barrier to entry. And even if you're able to overcome all of these challenges I just mentioned, you still have to build your app or your product or your service to compete with the existing players out there. And it's really hard to do because these are great, big companies with really good product teams, really good engineering teams. And so what's happened is we now have a winner-take-all scenario that we see as stifling innovation. And we would love to see more people be able to be involved in this space, more innovators. So think hobbyists, NGOs, researchers, universities. We want more involved. Yeah, and it's too bad the way the ecosystem is right now, because voice has such incredible potential to do good. Voice is a very natural interface, first of all. We learn to speak before we learn to read, before we learn to use a computer. And we imagine in the future that voice could empower whole new types of people to have access to technology and information that they didn't before. So we're thinking like sight impaired, or perhaps physically disabled, so they can't interact with a keyboard or a mouse or a screen. There are whole parts of the world that are illiterate, have illiterate populations, and so they have zero access to the internet right now. And we see voice as a way to empower these sorts of groups to have more access to this information. So this is Mozilla's attempt to make the voice technology and voice ecosystem more accessible, both for producers of voice services and products, but also for consumers themselves. We have, first of all, the data piece, which is Project Common Voice. And then we have the actual software that is powered by this data called Project Deep Speech. Okay, so that's kind of the history and the background of the project that myself and Kelly Davis are working on. This next part of the talk is also related to the voice ecosystem, but it's a little bit more experimental, so please bear with me. What I'd like to talk about now is how consumers of technology have learned to trust their technology over time, and how this trust plays an important role to the evolution of technology and how it can apply to voice. You see, I mentioned earlier that the voice and the web as we know it don't play together so well. So I want to try to illustrate why that's important and how things could be better. The goal is not really to propose a particular solution. It's really more about starting a conversation. So this is much more us trying to find ways to communicate how we view the voice technology and the internet and how they could play together. So thanks for listening. So let's go back to 1991, the invention of the internet, or the publication of the internet. Tim Berners-Lee, on August 6, 1991, he sent an email which was the executive summary of the internet. Actually, I think it was a news group. In it, he said that the internet was started with a philosophy that information should be freely available to anyone, no matter where they are on the globe. And we think this is an important concept to technology. Technology should be about freely spreading of information. Of course, at the time, he wasn't thinking about things like payments or advertising, and all of those things play an important part in technology. But at the core of this is the idea of access to information. And so I want to talk about that. So I have a couple pictures that I drew for you, and I hope that they make sense. So let's start with 1991. 1991, it was pretty simple to trust our computers. They weren't really connected to anything. It was just this box. And anytime you wanted to give them access to more information, you had to physically insert a piece of hardware, like a disk or maybe an Ethernet cable. And so we would very easily and freely put tax information on these computers, or credit card information, bank records, because we knew to trust it. We understood it. And so in these pictures that we're going to draw, I have this little kind of blue cloud. This cloud represents trust and choice. And the reason why I put those two things together is that trust and choice are intrinsically linked to me. If you don't have choice, then you can't have trust. Trust is very active. So if you didn't have choice, it's more of like, I hope this does what it wants, not I can choose. So this cloud that I've drawn for you in a very abstract way is trust and choice, and it was very simple in the early days. But what if I wanted to install new applications on this computer? Well, how would I do that? Well, you would go to an app store. And what I mean by an app store is I mean a physical brick and mortar store where you'd pick up software. And this was very easy for us because we had been going to brick and mortar stores for thousands of years. So we knew kind of the model of how to trust app stores and how to purchase software and put it on our machines. And we had trust and choice for both the computers that we were buying and where we got the software from, which was a good thing for us. But now let's talk about the internet. The internet introduced a lot of complexity. So first of all, we had this thing called a user agent, which kind of brokered your access to the internet. You had the information superhighway itself, which has a bunch of magic in it. You know, these are things like ISPs, backbone routers, ICANN for domain registry, a whole bunch of things that we don't have to think about because the browser kind of brokers that for us. And then on the further side of that, you had many, many websites that were all under construction. And we as users, we had to learn how to trust this system. We had to learn how to trust our browsers, how to trust our ISPs, and how to trust our individual websites. And it took years for us before we even started doing things like credit card transactions. PayPal was years after 1991. So we had to learn, and it wasn't a fast process, but we did learn. And through that, we got access to many levels of choice, which we think is really important to technology. Now let's talk about a competing model for consumers and using technology. And that's the App Store. So I love to use Apple as an example of this because Apple does a really good job with their ecosystem. You know, inside of Apple, you have your devices. You buy your devices from Apple. You get all of your apps from Apple. And all of the developers either work for Apple or subscribe to the Apple developer program and have to push their content through the Apple ecosystem, basically the App Store. And as users, we love this because we don't have to think too much. It's either you trust Apple or you don't. And you know, I personally trust Apple. They are, you know, a good company that cares about privacy. But there are some bad things about this as well. So for instance, as a publisher, as a service provider, as an app developer, I have to go through Apple. And they decide whether or not my app or technology can exist in their ecosystem. So I can't compete with Apple, for instance. That's one thing. Apple also takes a 30% pay cut. And this is pretty standard across all app stores. You know, the Alexa skills take a 30% pay cut, for instance. And you just have less control over the type of experience. And the user has less choice because the user has to go through this app store or nothing. So it's all or nothing choice. And now let's talk about voice. With voice, there's all sorts of new types of data that are coming into this kind of ecosystem. You know, we have our family's voices. We have like some of our habits, like our music listening habits, maybe how our locks are working, maybe the power company information is going through there, our lights. All sorts of new inferences about our daily behavior is provided through this ecosystem because they get access directly to our voice data. And I think this is something that should be embraced. However, it's also something that we should go in with our eyes open and try to understand, like, what are the ramifications of this? Because right now, if you look at how voice works, it's much more of the App Store system. It's much more, I either trust the whole system or I don't. But could voice technology work how the internet works? Could we have this idea of a user agent, kind of like a browser, that is independent of the content? You see, right now, the voice assistants we buy, they're agents of the vendor that we bought it from. They represent the Amazon ecosystem or the Google ecosystem. And like I said, these are, I could choose to trust these ecosystems. But without the independence between the devices and the experiences that we have, we lose a lot of ability to trust and a lot of ability to choose. And so we think that this first of all stifles innovation because less people can get involved and there's gatekeepers, but also it disempowers users to understand what their data is and to learn how to trust the technologies they're using. And we think this is not a great future for voice. But as I said, I'm not here to propose any particular solution to this problem. I'm here to call it out as a problem and let you know how we're thinking about it. As I said, step one for Mozilla and for the work that Kelly and I are doing is about creating the technology that makes speech recognition open, accessible, and easy for everyone. Cheap, basically, so more people can get involved. From there, it's up to us as consumers to demand better services that represent us. And so each of us has to demand that. And so this should be an ongoing, we would love if this was an ongoing conversation as we moved into the future of voice technology. So that's it. That's what I wanted to talk to you about today. Thank you for coming and listening. If there are any things that you found interesting and would like to talk about, here's some contact information. You have my Twitter handle, also my personal email address. Don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love talking about this stuff. So get involved.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike, for the great talk. There's a question in the chat. Can the speaker elaborate about achieving superhuman accuracy on what speech data sets?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Yeah. So we were, at that time, our test set, which we're expanding, but our test set was based upon the LibreSpeech test set. And LibreSpeech is Project Gutenberg books, so public domain books that this organization had read and collected, they recorded speakers reading books from the public domain, and then collected that data set as a data set to train speech technology. And so our test set was, that I'm talking about, was based on the LibreSpeech. So mostly American accents, English, reading books. And so that's where our accuracy level was getting, sub 5% error rate. And I think that human speech is around 6% error rate, something like this. Kelly Davis, who's on, knows more about that. But yes, it was on the LibreSpeech test set.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions or follow-ups, either in the chat or you can unmute yourself? Are there any plans to create a TensorFlow JS implementation of deep speech so it can run in a browser?
I love this idea. I think right now, so there are some technical challenges. We have actually talked about this in the past. There are some technical challenges and some limitations within deep speech right now, not deep speech, sorry, TensorFlow right now, that make it pretty hard to compile for the web using the WASM toolkit, if you're familiar with that. But they're not insurmountable challenges. I think mostly what it is our team, which is still a fairly small team, having the bandwidth to work on those kind of problems. But we would love to do it. I think one of the biggest challenges that I think I would love to see is that able to do both training and speech recognition, it's helpful to have access to the GPU, because the GPU is this graphics processing unit on your computer that helps you calculate really good graphics for computers, but it's also really great for machine learning and what's called inference, which is the speech recognition part. And so the story for the web's access to the GPU is not so great right now. It's the interface is called WebGL. It's a few years old compared to what the newer technologies like TensorFlow use, and so we would have to bridge that gap somehow. And so it's non-trivial, however non-insurmountable. And I would love it if we could embed speech recognition straight into web content. I think that's such a cool and powerful idea. However, we're not quite there yet.
Thank you. Another question, dealing with dozens of English language dialects, is each separate or just part of the system?
Yeah, that's another excellent question. So dealing with accents, dialects, and language variants, this is a topic that Kelly and I are working on pretty hard right now, especially as we go into other languages. Right now, we have a system where we track kind of like the native accent. So people who learned English in one of the native regions of the world, we track that, and we say, okay, did you learn Great British English, US English? There's also like Singaporean English and a number of other ones that we do. However, there are standards bodies out there or groups working on the accent variant problem. And so we want to kind of do things in a standard way. And so that's what we're doing right now, some research into how that would work. And we're going to update our what's called profile with the ability for people to self-identify with more specific groups, like subgroups of a language. Overall, we want to collect Spanish, but we also want to be able to track dialects and accents in there. And so we're trying to do so in a standardized way. We're constantly improving this, and this is a thing that we're working on right now.
Great. And then another question, what age groups do you have? Any early childhood, 5 to 6 year olds?
Yeah. So right now, the official guidance on the website is that you could only, if you're a child, you must have parental supervision. So under 18, parental supervision to donate to the Common Voice website. And we also don't allow users, we have an age group that people can self-identify, but we don't bucket children versus adults right now. And I think, at some point we'll want to look at this Right now, most of our efforts are around kind of like the general case. And so we're trying to collect as many words and as many phonemes and as many languages and many people as possible, and not focusing, for instance, on early childhood or elderly or specific. We're just trying to cast a wide net. I think eventually, as our product explorations lead us down more specific use cases, we will start to focus on particular data sets and segments of this data. So far, we're just collecting, kind of casting a wide net. So we do have some children in there, I know, because I have friends who've done this, but it's not something that we're specifically tailoring our experience around.
Thank you. And then there's a point from Yassi that says, thank you for starting this important conversation. ESSA, International Society of Service Innovation Professionals, which is the sponsor actually of this talk, is a huge proponent of open AI and open innovation. How could we continue the conversation with you? And there's a reply in the chat from one of your colleagues. We could set up a meeting to look for common goals. And but I didn't know if you wanted to remark on that, Mike, as well.
Sure. Yeah, Kelly and I work very closely on that, and yeah, we love talking to people. So part of our effort here is around looking for partnerships with organizations or entities that have shared values. We start with shared values, and then from shared values, it seems like a lot of things fall in place. Like if we can find out early, if we kind of share the same vision for the world, then finding shared goals and then projects to collaborate on is usually the easier part. And spending 30 minutes to chat about our various projects is a low risk to possible reward effort on our part. So we would love to talk to pretty much anybody who would like to speak with us. And indeed, one of the reasons we're here is to kind of spread awareness and to put our name out there so that we can understand who else is interested in this space and who wants to help with this. Because we want this project to kind of grow beyond just what Mozilla is capable of. Because as Mozilla, we're actually a pretty small corporation in the overall space. And so we need help from communities and other corporations and startups and universities to really make this project and this data set useful. So please reach out to us. Please talk to us. We have contact information here, but of course you can find us on the internet as well.
Great. Any other remarks from anyone? And please thank Mike in the chat for the excellent talk. There is another remark about India and the underserved markets there, and languages beyond English will become critical with providing speech-based services, where you have a large number of languages and rural populations that, use voice as the main method of communication.
Right.
Yeah, like me from Brazil, you have Portuguese, yeah?
Yes, so I think I can talk kind of generally about that. We are definitely looking at under-resourced languages. I'm not sure if Portuguese would be one of those under-resourced languages, but we're also looking at Portuguese as well. So we're
yes.
Really what we're doing is making Common Voice a toolkit for communities to be able to collect this data set for themselves. So we have tools for basically spinning up a version of Common Voice in whatever languages the community exists for. And as I said, we have 44 languages right now, language communities that are building up around this. Brazilian Portuguese is one of those. And then
nice.
we also have many languages in India, like Telugu, I think is Telugu Kabayo. I have to remember them because I don't know. I wasn't familiar with them until I heard about this project. But certainly, under-resourced languages is a target for us, not just for speech technology, but we think there's an interesting story there around language and cultural preservation. And so, we have some friends, for instance, in the Welsh community, actually Bangor University in Wales, who was recently presented about us at the LREC conference in Japan, about how you can use Common Voice to help preserve under-resourced languages. And so that's definitely part of our goals as well. Of course, we're specifically interested in the speech technology piece of that because we think that there is some interesting ideas around cultural preservation for language and speech technology.
Great, thank you. There are people asking about other languages like Russian and so on. And if anybody wants to collaborate, you can put your email privately. If you don't want to put it in the chat, you can just send it to me. Yeah. Any other remarks, Mike?
That's it. I mean, if there are, so we are translated into Russian. If there are other languages that I don't know about, and I'm sure there are, because I think there's like 6,000 languages, reach out to me and I can help you get started with localizing Common Voice for your language and starting that collection process if you're interested.
Okay, and somebody mentions Tagalog. Yes, and actually you don't need to give me your email address. Just email mikey@mozilla.com. It's on the screen, so you can go right ahead if you want to collaborate.
Please do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'll leave the chat open, but I'll close the call now. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Susan. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
All right.